Okay, today is the best day ever, June 26th. So let's start with that. This is the last open to the public Does It Pencil webinar. And that's been fully disclosed for a while. So next week, starting next week, only the special people get to show up. And so the way this is going to happen on Friday mornings is I will be sending all of you the email with the link, okay? And I thought about different ways of doing this, like there's a secret door and a waiting room and all the other tra-la-las. And I think because it's you guys and because it's this big, I'm not going to sweat that right now. I'm just going to send the link to you guys, okay? Now, starting next week, I have a favor to ask, and I will probably ask this for the next couple months, and that is every week, if you wouldn't mind, share the link with one or two people that you think might benefit from this, okay? It's called a referral. You know what those are. And I'll work on this weekend, but the configuration of the YouTube page is going to be like this. There'll be 3 different sets of videos. One of the sets of videos is what I call Salvo, S-A-L-V-O, and that's the word that I use just for my lectures, okay? So little snips and bits and pieces, you know, they're like 3 to 10 minutes long depending. And those will be available for public consumption. Also available for public consumption will be the first 7 minutes of all the webinars, and those are about a third of the way done. I'll work on those this weekend. And then also available for public consumption will be all of the audio from the webinars. They can't see everything. That's just for the special people, but they can listen to it. And I also have a Spotify channel as well, as you probably know. So if you go to Spotify and just put in Does It Pencil, I should come up first and all the episodes there too, okay? So we'll see how that all goes to share the love, okay? Okay, so let's talk about capital gains. Okay, because that is what Carl's talk is. It's about the deferral, the delay, and possibly the avoidance of capital gains. Okay, now this is all stuff that I cover in Does It Pencil. It's informally what was known as Course 3, and it will be in the new course just called the Tax Course. But I wanted to take a minute before he got here just to kind of refresh and review you on a couple things, okay? So first of all, capital gains, the tax, especially, now I'm talking here primarily about real estate because y'all are real estate people. And what I want to do first is just go over some real super basic stuff, okay, that a lot of people don't know but should know. When you're looking at a capital gains analysis on the sale of a piece of real estate, there's actually 2 taxes that are due. A lot of people don't think about this. There's the gain, which is one kind of tax, and there's the depreciation recapture. Okay, so the way that I'm going to talk about this is starting with those 2 boxes, the gain and the depreciation recapture when you go to sell. Okay, now I'm not talking about doing a 1031 tax deferred exchange. I'm not talking about an installment sale. I'm talking about an outright sale for cash. And I'm talking about selling a piece of property that has been held by the taxpayer as an investment property. I'm not talking about your primary residence. I'm not talking about your vacation home. Okay. Now, a vacation rental is different. Okay. If the owner has accepted income and taken depreciation, then this conversation applies. But it's just like, oh, I've got a beach house and we go there 3 weeks a year and other weeks of the year it's dark. This doesn't apply. Okay. This does not apply to your primary residence as you declare as a taxpayer, what the tax code would call your tax home. Okay. This is different. This is a property held for investment. All right, let's start first with depreciation. And I'm not going to give you a big, long lecture about this. I want to keep this kind of short because I was waiting for our guest speaker. So I can do more detail on this at a later date if you want, but here's just kind of the capstone summary. You take this as you go. So you take it every year, and the beauty of it is that it's treated as an expense against income. Okay, now you don't write a check for it, you just do it on your tax return. But the way that it's treated is that is an expense against income. So what that does, as I'm going along my merry way as an owner, is that reduces the amount of income subject to tax every year. Therefore, it reduces my tax liability. Therefore, it allows me to keep more of my own money to grow for my future wealth. So in a way, it's kind of like a Roth IRA compared to a traditional. Okay, you get to keep more of your own money. But the problem with all this tax stuff, and I'll talk about this here in just a minute, is that you're always dragging around the future consequences with you. They don't go away completely. And that's one of the cool things about what Carl does, is that he sets up entities and structures so that you never recognize what you're dragging around with you. But notwithstanding that, just kind of note to self, you're always dragging this around. You're always dragging around your depreciation. But as you go about your merry way as an owner, you're paying less tax because you can take this depreciation and impute it as an expense against income as you go. Okay? And I'll talk about how the tax is treated on that here in a minute. Okay, the second kind of the tax is the gain. All right, now there's a couple things to remember about capital gains. First of all, you have to look at the length of ownership, okay? And the trigger here is 1 year and 1 day. Okay, now when I was doing my graduate tax work stuff with the IRS, they were very emphatic about the fact that it's not 1 year, it's 1 year plus 1 day. Okay, so if you own an asset more than 1 year and 1 day, it's treated as what I'm going to call it an LTCG, just easier to read because, you know, my handwriting and stuff. Long-term capital gain. Okay, 1 year and 1 day, long-term capital gain. The inverse is less than 1 year. Okay, and that's a short-term capital gain. All right. So there's two kinds of gains. Morning, Carl.
Good morning.
I'm glad you're here. I got about 5 minutes and then we'll onboard you, okay? I'm just finishing up some stuff. All right, so we got these two kinds of gains, the short-term and the long-term. Short-term capital gains are taxed at your ordinary income tax rate. So it's just like income, but you don't pay FICA tax on it. I'm just talking about federal income tax and state income tax if the asset is subject to that. All right. If you have a long-term capital gain, your tax treatment is different. It's typically 0, 15, or 20%. Okay. So this can seem a little bit weird. I don't want to get in the weeds here. I want to hand the baton to Carl. But essentially what happens is if you think about income like a ladder, like the more you make, the higher it goes, what happens is your capital gains income is stacked on top. Okay, so simple example. I make $200,000 in taxable income in a year, and I sell some stocks and I make 50 grand. Okay, the 50 goes on top of the 200. That's how IRS treats it. And because federal income tax systems are progressive, the more income you make, the higher rate each subsequent dollar is taxed at. Okay, but what happens, this 0, 15, or 20 business, is that these are tiers. Okay, so if you're in the 15% bracket, your gain is only going to be taxed at 15%, the gain portion of income that year. If you kick up into the 20% bracket, your gain will only ever be taxed at 20%, meaning it won't go up to the highest rate of 37% currently. So capital gains rates are cutoff rates, and that's different for long-term than short-term, because short-term, there is no cutoff. Okay. Now, when we do Does It Pencil worksheets and discussions and talks and stuff like that, I tell people, if you're going to estimate this, estimate it at 15%. And here's why. Because currently in the code, if you are single, you don't kick into that 20% bracket until you make over about, $533,000. So if you're under this, you're still going to pay at 15%. If you're MFJ, standing for married filing jointly, you don't kick into the 20% thing until you make about 600,000. So anything less than this, you're at 15%. Over, you're at 20. Okay. So for discussion purposes, for most folks, I say, look, if you're thinking about selling and you're thinking about what's my tax going to be, just figure about 15% on the gain portion. Now, remember, if we go back to the beginning, I said there's two buckets. There's the gain and the depreciation recapture. And the depreciation is recaptured at a federal rate of 25%. Okay, it's progressive up to 25. But again, in Does It Pencil, I tell people just estimate it at 25%. Okay, now we go over that in a hell of a lot more detail and so forth in Does It Pencil. But I just kind of wanted to give you a taste of this. And the last thing that I want to say, and I'm going to turn it over to Carl here, is this. For me as an instructor, for me as a taxpayer, for me as an investor, for me as just someone who's been doing this for 40 years of my life, there are two words that if you don't really understand this stuff, that I think are the most important words that you must remember. And the words are adjusted basis. This is where all of it is triggered. Sorry, Kelly, I spelled that wrong. Let me try to erase it. Anyway, it's BASIS. You understand. Sorry. Okay, so what is your adjusted basis? Well, this is what it is. It's your price plus your capital improvements minus the depreciation you've taken. Okay, this is your adjusted basis. Your sale price minus your adjusted basis is your gain. And again, baked inside of this, you have what I call the pure gain and the depreciation recapture. All right. The good news is all of this will be on the video, so you can look at for your viewing pleasure at a later date. So I'm going to put a handout in the chat that gives you Carl's bio and resume and so forth. But I was introduced to Carl about 2 or 3 months ago by one of my students, friend of mine, Pete Cullen. He's been on the call a couple times. He's like, oh, dude, you got to talk to this guy. He's like your soul brother. Although yesterday I was editing the webinar where Mercedes called Raphael her animal spirit or some such thing because of the way that they like to shop. It was pretty funny to relive that moment. Available to alumni at the Does It Pencil Society page, but just saying. Anyway, so Carl and I, I don't think we have identical backgrounds. We both know something about tax. Anyway, so he kind of focused in on this tax stuff, and he realized very quickly when he was early in his career as a financial consultant that, surprise, surprise, most people had all their equity stuff on their balance sheet tied up in real estate. They're paying a ton of tax. He thinks, well, I'm going to save the world. I'm going to run after this stuff. So his website, which I will make sure you have, I'm going to put a handout in the chat. It's on there, but 2 words, real simple, defertax.com. He's got some great videos there. You should check them out. And one of the things that was very interesting about reading Carl's resume is that he actually has over 40, that's a 4 with a 0, 40 different strategies, he and his partner, to help clients defer tax. And, in my career, just having kicked around with this stuff as long as I have, and, the IRS, EA stuff and the whole deal, I can attest that most of your clients' tax advisors, tax preparers, don't know most of what Carl is going to talk about. And what I want to emphasize is some people might think, oh, well, the guy's just selling snake oil and bullshit. No, he's actually not. He just specializes in an area of the code. And I think what's great, one of the reasons I decided to have him on, is that he will work with your clients, CPAs and attorneys, to make sure everybody's pulling the rope the same way. And that's super value add for sure. Okay. All right. Carl, I'm going to thank your mother for writing that intro bio for you, and you're up.
Thank you. I appreciate the opportunity to talk with all of you guys. Do I understand most of you are real estate professionals? Is that right?
Yes.
Okay.
Most people are.
So, one of the things that Chris and I talk about, Chris is my business partner. He actually, funny story. He started off as my client and saved him about $500,000 in taxes on the sale of a primary residence that he had. And several years later was doing a review with him on his investment portfolio that he had with me. And he asked him what he was doing, and he says, well, I'm kind of bored. He retired from Intel, and I'm kind of bored, so I'm doing some freelance marketing. And I said, well, I need some help with some freelance marketing. So next thing you know, we're working together, and I actually got a book coming out in the not too distant future. It's called Uncle Sam is Your Friend. And Joe, I'm going to give you some credit here. I'm changing the subtitle, and the subtitle is The Tax Code is a Penalty System for the Uninformed. Thank you for that, Joe. The other subtitle was the tax code is a penalty system for not doing what you're supposed to do with your money. It's a little longer, but I'm shortening it. Joe, hats off to you. But we cover in the book in there that we feel like the financial services industry is broken, and maybe many of you would agree with me. Most of us went to school and we didn't really learn much about taxes. We didn't really learn much about anything, financially speaking, much less, investing in real estate or buying businesses or anything else like that. And to kind of put in perspective for real estate owners, typically 80% of their net worth is in real estate for most people. And when they go to sell the asset, there's typically three people they're going to visit with. You, the real estate professional, number two, the CPA, and number three, the financial advisor. I think many of you would agree that's probably the first three people they would go visit. Typically, most real estate professionals are told by their upline brokers, don't give tax advice, don't even touch the topic. It represents too much legal liability. So they're not really going to get many answers from you. But you're not going to study it. You're not going to research it. Typically not going to, for fear of legal issues. So the second place they go to is the CPA. Now, Joe is definitely smarter than your average CPA, but I think we can all agree not all CPAs are created equal. Most of them are just tax preparers. Most of them are there just to tell you how much you owe. In fact, I was having a conversation with a lady named Marilyn who graduated not too long ago, San Diego State University, first in her class, master's degree in accounting. And I was going through some ideas for her client, and she had never heard of any of the stuff that I was talking about. So most CPAs are not going to be there to give an answer either. And then the third person is going to be the financial advisor. Most financial advisors, they might have access to one tax strategy called the Delaware Statutory Trust, which is an alternative to doing a traditional 1031 where you buy property and manage it yourself. In this case, you're basically giving money to a sponsor and letting them control it. But that's typically all they have from the standpoint of tax strategies. There's very minimal information out there as it relates to getting answers for, the disposition of the sale of the property. So the fourth option is just to simply go to the internet. And the question there is, what do you type? What do you put in there? What are you researching? And the sad part about that is the onus is upon the individual to not only vet the strategy, but vet the company, right? How long has the company been around? Has it ever been audited? There's some serious things to take into consideration before you do business with any tax strategist company. Another thing to think about is, can this strategy be used with another one? Can I use them in combination? I mean, you're supposed to figure all this stuff out. And so I figured there was the financial services industry is broken, and we're here to kind of fix that problem, for lack of a better expression. And so, And Joe, I like what you said. We're not selling anything. In fact, what we're trying to do is provide education. We'll be doing monthly webinars, and the webinar on a monthly basis will cover a singular tax strategy, maybe two. But the idea is to provide education. How much are we charging for these webinars? Nothing. In fact, just to give you an idea of how we work, we don't actually charge consultation fees to our clients for what we do. And the reason why we don't, it's kind of a, call it morals, values, and ethics. We want to provide the information, educate people. But I don't think it's right to make you pay me to find out if you can trust me, if that makes sense. So really the onus is upon me to prove the value of the strategy. Your job as a client is to poke holes in every single thing I say and find a reason not to do it. And I think that's a fair way to treat people. How many of you agree with me?
Yeah, that's awesome. Carl, let me ask you a question here. I know this is supposed to be the 3-question thing, but I got a bit on my somewhat my high horse there. We're going to go a couple minutes over, everybody, just because I gave you that little lesson thing to start with. I want to make sure everybody has time for their questions. So I'm pretty sure, Carl, that most of us, including me, could not, if you said, so what are the 40 tax strategies that a client can use to defer, avoid, or eliminate gain? I don't think I'd do very good on that quiz. Can you just give us the names and very brief descriptions of, say, your top 3 favorites that would apply to most situations?
Yeah, I mean, the 1031 exchange is kind of the low-hanging fruit. I would say most of you have probably heard of the 1031 exchange before. Most of you have probably actually done one for a client. We do about 200 to 250 per month for our clients across the country. We are a facilitator. That is one of our favorite strategies. There's a lot of issues with the 1031 exchange, as we know. I mean, namely the 45-day identification period can often be a non-starter for a lot of your clients. We have a way of fixing that problem and basically eliminating it. We can talk about that, but that's a favorite. I would also say too that a lot of boomers bought real estate. They bought investment property real estate many years ago, like I did. I'm not a boomer. I'm a 68 baby, so I'm an X-gen. But I owned a bit of real estate, and at some point, in my earlier days, I was thinking, hey, I'm going to have all this equity, and at some point in the future, I'm going to retire and live happily ever after. And then I realized, many boomers do, that hey, it's trapped. You have to do a 1031. If you don't want to pay any taxes, you're going to lose 30 to 40% of everything you've worked for, and it becomes very unattractive. So we have a Delaware statutory trust product that actually offers an opportunity for an 85% cash out refi option. So hypothetically, if you had a client that had $2 million property paid off, doesn't need to be paid off, but just hypothetical, they could sell that property, exchange it into an institutional quality asset with a credit tenant, and then 30 days later, do a cash out refi of roughly 85% of the equity, which means on $2 million of equity, they'd end up with $1.7 million in their bank account tax free. I don't know of anybody that offers anything close to that. It's pretty substantial. The nice thing about that is they no longer have to manage property, and they have $1.7 million in their bank account tax free, which if they sold the property and paid the tax, they'd probably have less in their bank account. And so in this case, they still own a $2 million interest in a institutional quality asset. But so that's number 2. I would have to say number 3, we do something called a historic preservation easement. This is more of an actual income tax reduction strategy. And if I could throw another one in there, cost segregation study is another one that we do. That's also another favorite for various reasons. But those are the top 3, I would say.
Okay, that's cool. And we talked about this before. Let me just repeat something I said earlier. So if someone does the Delaware Statutory Trust, and you don't have to get all the details of how it works, but essentially you turn the equity in the property into cash, right? And then you go and reinvest that money, you live off the income. Is that correct?
Yes, certainly. So the interesting thing about the Delaware Statutory Trust, and look, guys, I could spend about 15 minutes and teach you that there are actually 4 different financial structures of a Delaware Statutory Trust. So a Delaware statutory trust is not just a thing. Most financial advisors, by the way, sell it. I mean, it's a commissionable product, and it's often sold, not provided as a solution to a problem. And I think there's a huge distinction. If you hear somebody talking about the Delaware Statutory Trust, it's usually a product that they're trying to sell. At Deferred Tax, we do not view that product as a product to sell. In fact, it's actually from a wealth building standpoint, it's not a very good strategy at all. It can be a wealth preservation strategy, but I would say that it's probably not really the best wealth preservation strategy either. So if I taught you all 4 different financial structures of a Delaware statutory trust and you understood them at a basic level, the next time you hear a financial advisor trying to sell the product, just ask them the question, just out of curiosity, how many different financial structures of a Delaware statutory trust are there? And they'd probably stare at you like a deer in the headlights. So what you're describing, Joe, is an opportunity there. One of the strategies that we use, we call it the special DST, affectionately call it the special DST. There's a company that offers it. They're the only company that does it. One of the criteria at Deferred Tax is that if you're going to be a company offering a strategy on our platform, you had to have met certain criteria. One of those is that you had to have been audited before and you passed the audit. This particular company has, in fact, been audited 2016 and 17. They've been doing it since 1996, which is another bit of criteria. Tenure is another, element of criteria that you have to possess in order to be on our platform. But the ability for this company to basically buy an institutional quality asset and then allow us to exchange into it and then do a cash out refi of 85% is pretty powerful. And I have a question for you guys. And by the way, I was just doing a class for about 200 people at a real estate mastermind group. So these are all pretty sophisticated real estate investors. And I'm going to preface it by saying when I asked the question, they didn't know the answer. And so I'm going to ask you the question. And if you don't know the answer, that's pretty normal. But if one of you or 2 of you does have the answer, it's probably because you're on this webinar with Joe and you know Joe. So here goes the question. You bought a property for $500,000. You depreciated it as a rental property. You depreciated it down to $300,000. Many years later, right, the property's appreciated. It's now worth $2 million. You sell the property for $2 million. You do a 1031 exchange and you buy another property for $2 million. What happens to your basis? What happens to your depreciation schedule? You can't answer, Joe. That's my question.
Carries forward, doesn't it?
Can you elaborate on that?
No.
Okay.
I'm not as smart as Raphael.
That's okay.
I'm one of Joe's dumber students. No.
I love the answer. That's great.
Somebody's out in the marketing, Chris. Yeah, I'm Chris, and I'm one of Joe's dumber students. That always goes well.
So Joe, you got the answer. Go ahead.
Well, you can't depreciate what you've already depreciated, right?
Correct. Okay.
So the one thing I didn't hear was, to qualify, you have to go up in value and you have to add at least $1 in equity or debt, right? To qualify for the 1031.
At least $1 in equity or debt. Yeah.
You have to go up. Well, that's the way I was always taught.
Well, it's equal or higher. So you could literally say, and this is highly unlikely, Joe.
So the adjusted basis is 300,000. Anthony has his hand up. Let him go.
Yeah, go for it, Anthony.
So that basis carries over to your heirs as well, correct?
No. No. Good.
On the 1031 exchange, on the exchanged property.
I'm sorry?
On the exchanged property. In other words, they don't, the tax doesn't reset from 1031 exchange. Only on properties that you currently own do they reset upon the death. Correct?
Well, no, I mean, real estate is an asset like a regular stock portfolio, not IRA, not 401k. Any assets like collectibles, like real estate, like stock, does actually get a step up in basis. There's actually 9 states in the country, and I can't believe I'm saying this, but California is one of them, where there's actually a tax benefit. It's called a community property state, and there would be a 100% step up in basis if your spouse passed. You get a 100% step up in basis on the asset. So your depreciation schedule would actually start all over. But that's not my question. My question is, if you sold the asset at a $300,000 basis, let's say you had 20 years into your depreciation schedule on a residential property, which means you had 7.5 years left of depreciation, and you sold that property for $2 million, you bought another property at $2 million. Here's your answer. Nothing really happens to your depreciation schedule. On the new property, you have 7.5 years left of depreciation. Joe, you did hint at the answer, and that was that if you just so happen to buy a property at $2.5 million, the extra $500,000 would be added to basis, and the structure value, the ratio thereof, would be depreciable for 27 years. My point is that if you sold the property for $2 million and you bought a property for $2.5 million, you don't get to restart your depreciation schedule based on a $2.5 million purchase price.
Exactly.
A lot of people don't know that. Okay, so why am I bringing that up? Well, Joe, you asked a question of why the special DST, where the 85% cash out feature, is so attractive to me. Here's why. Take that same owner with a $2 million asset, right? $300,000 basis. He exchanges it into this, institutional quality property. It's a commercial property. So whatever he had left is going to get stretched in depreciation for 39 years. So there will be a reduction actually in depreciation. But my point is, you keep it. Now, here's the fun part. You do the cash out refi, you get your 1.7 in cash in your bank account, tax free. That is brand new money. You go out and buy a $3 million asset, or let's just say a $2 million asset for your $1.7 million. Your basis is $2 million. Your depreciation schedule is based off a $2 million purchase price. So you keep your old basis, you keep your old depreciation schedule, and you get a brand new depreciation schedule on the new money. So that could be potentially fairly substantial. And if you guys understand anything about depreciation, it's on residential property, you take the structure value, which is typically 75% of the purchase price. So you figure 1.5 million on a $2 million purchase price, right? And you divide that by 27.5 years. Folks, we're talking about increasing, if you bought a property for 500,000, depreciation would be based off about 350 if my math is serving me, somewhere along in there. You'd have about a $10,000 to $12,000 depreciation schedule. If you sold that property, did a 1031, and just bought another property at $2 million, you'd still have 10 to 12,000 of depreciation for 7.5 years. If you do my strategy, where you get your 85% cash out, and you go buy another property at $2 million, your depreciation could go to $30,000 to $40,000 a year depreciation schedule. That's substantially better than just doing a straight 1031 and going into a property on your own. That was a lot of information, like drinking water from a fire hose, but hopefully you guys understood what I was saying there.
Makes a lot.
Yeah, Carl, can I jump in and ask a couple questions just for clarification, because I know most of what you're saying. So my first question is this. I have a couple of them. One of the taglines for those that have never done a 1031 is the qualification is what's called like-kind property. Okay. And I'm not going to get into all the definition of that, but we'll just, for discussion purposes, say real estate for real estate. Here's my question. Inside of the DST, the Delaware Statutory Trust, using the strategy that you said in your example, if I'm the client and I walk with 1.7 million, right, no recognition of tax, do I have to purchase real property to continue in that DST, or can I purchase a different asset type? For example, can I invest in private equity or stocks or bonds, or how does that work? Because in a traditional 1031, that's not like kind. You cannot do that. So how does it work inside of a DST?
It's a great question. So first of all, when you sell your duplex for $2 million or fourplex or whatever it is, and you do a 1031 exchange, and you exchange it into the Delaware Statutory Trust, you own a $2 million interest in that property. When you refinance 30 days later and get 1.7 out in your bank account tax-free, you still own a $2 million interest in the property. The 1031 exchange is done. The the taxes are deferred. You've already completed the transaction. So when the cash out refi happens 30 days later, the 1.7 million in your bank account is your money. Take it to Vegas and put it on black if you want. Not a good idea. I don't recommend that. But you literally have the ability to do that. It's your money. There is no requirement on that money whatsoever. Go out and buy a Ferrari, go out and buy a vacation home. How about this one? How many times have you heard the question about a real estate investor who wants to do a 1031 exchange and get into a property that they can move into? I would say you asked what are my top three, Joe, tax strategies. If you asked me what my top five were, the deferred sales trust, and Christine, I'm sorry I didn't get there. You were speaking about something called the deferred sales trust a while ago. You may not have known the actual name or title, but that's what it is. But we use that particular strategy, which again, it's on our platform. It's offered by the originating law firm. This law firm's been audited 29 times and they've never failed an audit. And so that's a very effective strategy. But I'll give you a case example. We had a client that had a property that they purchased for $250,000. They put $500,000 of capital improvements into it. So if you were all paying attention when Joe was talking earlier, their cost basis was $750. Now they can take the $500,000 exemption on top of that because they did live in the house for 2 out of the last 5 years, which means that they sold the house for $1.25 million. They'd pay no tax. The issue, though, was that the house was actually valued at something closer to $2.75 million, which meant they had a $1.5 million tax liability. Uncle Sam was going to take 30 to 40% of that. And that did not appeal to them, which meant the real estate agent wasn't getting the listing and the client wasn't going to sell. So I had done some work for a family member of theirs. I saved her actually $1.3 million in taxes. She said, you got to talk to this Carl guy. So long story short, Jeff, what we were able to do using that strategy, and I want to get into the weeds on it, but this house was paid off. Again, it doesn't have to be. It's not a requirement, but this particular house was. What we were able to do is we were able to extract the $750,000 out of the property. How do you do that? Put a mortgage on it. So we put a mortgage on it. It's only going to be temporary. And then wait about 2 months, we put the house up for sale. $2.75 million. 2 days later, they get an all-cash offer for $3.625 million, almost $1 million over asking. Okay, and I'm sorry.
It must be in Cupertino.
It was actually on the edge of it was Santa Clara and San Jose, so it was very close to Cupertino. $3.625 million, all cash, 10-day close. And long story short, the money comes to escrow. What we did was we actually structured this, Christine, into this deferred sales trust structure. So basically the property goes into the trust and the trust sells the asset to the buyer. The way that it looks to the IRS is that the trust bought the asset on an installment sale for $3.625 million and sold it to the buyer for $3.625 million. So the trust basically sold it for what it bought it for, and there's no tax liability to that trust as a result. The buyer, from a transaction standpoint, came in with $3.625. The escrow officer paid off the $750,000 loan, and that money's already been used to buy another downsized home. Okay. And the remainder of the cash, $2.9 million, $2.8 million or so, ended up in the trust, totally tax deferred. I would say the success of this story was that previous to me meeting them, they were a typical boomer, all this equity in a primary residence, $500,000 in their IRAs. Okay. And they were skimping and saving because if a health issue came up, they were really worried. Long story short, and their income was Social Security and a small little pension. They were only pulling $6,500 a month, living in Santa Clara, edge of Cupertino. Not very good lifestyle. Their income now is over $20,000 a month, and their account is still growing in spite of their withdrawals. So to your point, Joe, we increased their. It was funny. We were doing a review We do quarterly reviews for our clients, and we couldn't get a hold of them. We thought, well, maybe they're comfortable with their investments. No big deal. They don't have to do the review. Well, 2 or 3 weeks later, they give us a call. Oh, we want to do the review. Sorry, we were on a cruise in the Netherlands. And I'm like, you know what? That's why I'm in the business right there. That's why I
Well,
do.
as we say in Game of Thrones, I take the knee. That's awesome. Okay, let's wrap up here. Anthony, you had your hand up. Let's finish up with you. You got to unmute there, sir.
There you go.
Yep. Perfect. Okay. Little hand for Carl.
What's the name of
Awesome.
Carl, what's the
Very
name of your
good, sir.
business or the company you work
So
for?
I'm gonna cover that right now. Okay. So the website is defertax.com. Okay. And he's got a bunch of videos and stuff there as well. And the phone number is 877 tax. Is it G or G's?
Yeah, strategies.
Okay, perfect. So that's the contact information.
That phone number looks very long.
Well, just type it in and all your
Don't
dreams will
spell
come
out
true.
strategy.
You'll be
How's
fine.
that?
Okay.
STRA.
All right, I'm going to finish with this. Thanks for showing up, everybody, today. And like I said when we started, for people who got here a little bit late, next week, starting next week, only the people who are members are going to get the email, and you'll get the link for all of July. And if you can bring 1 or 2 other people, just ask them to join us. That'd be great. See if they want to become a part of the campfire. I have been kicking around this tax stuff for a long time in different capacities. And now that we've gone through Carl's presentation, I want to just kind of close with this. One of my favorite sayings, and I've got a few of them, but one of my favorite sayings or biggest lessons Carl talked about leverage is as follows. Most people don't know that they don't know what they don't know. Okay? And if you can kind of say that twice fast in your head, you don't have to do it on camera. But if you think about that, that is both a giant opportunity and potentially a giant liability for professional licensees. Okay, so the opportunity is once you feel more comfortable with this and you can be in a conversation or at least broker an introduction with Carl, well, as Carl said earlier, and I 100% agree, you might get the book of business that your competitor did not because you knew something they didn't know and you knew something the client didn't know. Okay? And the giant liability is if you don't, this is an argument, but arguably, and I've actually seen people get sued for this before, believe it or not. I knew a guy that got sued for not telling his client that a 1031 deferred exchange even existed. Okay. Now, I don't think any court of competent jurisdiction is going to go, well, you didn't tell your client about it, level 3 of a Delaware statutory trust, you're guilty. I don't think that's going to happen. But, this is a part of this sector of the world we're talking about. We all pay taxes. We're focusing today on tax liabilities with real estate investment specialty. And if you can start knowing some of this stuff, I think that only helps you, keep the potential liability away. But more importantly, it opens up opportunities for you that you won't otherwise get. The last deal that I brokered was an apartment deal. And I had the ability to walk up to the client and go, well, I can show you 3 options. Sell for cash, 1031, or an installment sale. And I can show you how they work and show you the internal rate of return of each. Nobody else could do that. There were like 10 brokers interviewed for the job. I got the job, and that's why. So knowing these things can be very helpful. Okay? All right. Cool.
So,
Carl?
one last thing. I'm with Christine. This phone number doesn't pencil out. So what is the actual phone number?
It's 408. Actually, I'm sorry. The 877 number. Let me give you my 408 number. 408. I put it in the chat. 408-261-2275.
Oh, okay, perfect.
Yeah, and the tax strategies is it's 877 TAXSTRA. So you don't
You
spell
just
out
stop at the
strategy.
A, Kelly.
Oh, okay, I gotcha. Okay.
That's okay.
Okay.
All right. Thanks for showing up, everybody. Take care. God bless you. Have a good weekend. Thank you, Carl.